All right, we're going to get started since it looks like it's leveling out a little bit on participant count. Thank you guys for joining. Ryan Castle, CEO of the Cape Cod Association of Realtors, MLS, for our monthly Zoomed In on real estate that we do. Bring you guys the latest information you need to know and bring in some guests to talk about what's going on, either nationally, locally, or statewide. And today, locally, really. We're really fortunate to have both Kristy Senatori and Erin Perry from the Cape Cod Commission. They've done two new studies. One completely new around home buyers during COVID era that we worked with them on, and really dive in who these home buyers were and what their intentions are and what drew them to the Cape. The other is they updated a survey they've done, I believe, twice before on second homeowners on the Cape, on who they are and trying to understand them and what they use their property for. So they've updated that study, and they're going to talk about that today. As always, our Zoomed In on Real Estate is presented by the Cooperative Bank Cape Cod, and we really thank them for being partners with us there. So a couple of things we have right now. We have these 8 CE classes through the end of March. If you need your license renewed by your birthday being in April or May, great time to take classes. 6 of these, or many of these, are online webinars. The one on the 8th, 17th, March 17th, and then also March 23rd. We do have a couple here scheduled for classes on February 10th and March 10th. We'll see how that plays out. We canceled the ones in June in January due to the spike in COVID, and we'll keep you updated. But sign up for those, whether in person or online, as we provide education where you want it. Those brokers on the call, so whether you're a broker or an office manager, that kind of thing, you would have got an invite from us a couple of weeks ago for these roundtables we're hosting next week, 10 a.m. on Tuesday and Wednesday. We have a large broker roundtable and a small broker roundtable. We're going to be talking about fair housing issues, diversity issues in real estate, some new MLS policies that were passed down from the National Association of Realtors and what those means, and also some other broker management updates that you're going to want to definitely sign up for. If you haven't signed up or missed that email from us, feel free to email support@ccr.com, and they'll get you registered as long as you have the appropriate rights in your office to do that. If not, your broker can always, if you can't attend as a broker, you can always have someone else attend on your behalf. So just give us a call and let us know what you want to do. Leadership Academy. We do this every this is, I think, our 6th year of the Leadership Academy, maybe 7th. The deadline to application is February 7th. We limit it to 15 or fewer participants, so please take the time to register if you want to participate. It's $250 this year, but it also includes admission to our Zoomed In on Real Estate Live Summit that is April 5th at the Oquasit. That's a $200 value in of itself. So if you want to go to the summit and you want to do Leadership Academy, sign up for Leadership Academy. You get free interest in the summit, because one of the sessions is at the summit with Lead with Joy with Valerie Garcia. And I was talking to her yesterday on a call as we were going over some things for the summit and for this Leadership Academy. It's going to be a really exciting session there, really special. So not only that, you have the Cape Cod Commission that does a session for Leadership Academy as well, diving deeper into some of the data that you'll hear about today, and some of the things they have at their fingertips. But hopefully you take the time to apply if you're interested. If you just want to know more about it, give me a call. Give Pat a call on our staff, but give me a call. Talk to me. See if it works. I can talk to you, see if it's right for you. So please reach out. Reminder, we have on our webpage entire primer on FEMA, the Risk 2.0 for flood insurance. As flood insurance changed October 1st, you probably are encountering some things. I encourage you to reach out to me with feedback about what your clients are seeing in pricing. I'm interested to know how Risk 2.0 for flood insurance is going on the Cape. You can find our entire flood insurance resource around 2.0 at ccr.com/flood insurance. So reminder of that. A couple things. I shared this chart in email with you guys last week, but I think it's really important. the 90% drop in inventory we've seen since 2007, but it really shows the inventory drops on the Cape. When we were even in 2006, 2007, up around 5,000 homes for sale. I looked this morning, 213 single family homes for sale on the Cape, 81 condos for sale, 77 single family homes on the sale for sale on the Cape under 1 million, and 70 condos on the Cape for sale under 1 million. When's the last time ever? Never. We have almost as many condos for sale under 1 million as we do single family homes. So many of you guys tell us that, you know, gosh, it's just new listings are selling quicker. Well, look, new listings are still down. We showed you a chart in our year-end wrap-up email that new listings were down over 1,000 from last year. This is for January, so the numbers from ending yesterday. New listings were down in January compared to January of last year, and definitely down from January of 2020 pre-COVID. So, I mean, if you take a look at that, like we're still not seeing the clip of new listings come on, which means that there's something greater going on. And I think we're seeing this. The problem is all over the country. When I talk to counterparts, I was talking to one in Lexington, Kentucky, and Austin, Texas, and Denver, Colorado the other day, and they were all seeing new listings higher. Now, how much of theirs, and a good percentage of theirs, because I know, for example, I was talking to my counterpart in Charleston, South Carolina the other day, and 40% of their new listings last year were new construction. We're never going to reach that capacity, so we may never see the new listings come on because we don't see the new construction happen at any real clip pace. January was the lowest level of sold listings since May 2020. Now, why was it the lowest number of sold listings since May 2020? Because remember, May 2020, you had March and April of 2020 under the stay-at-home order, and really not much happening there. So you saw those reflected in solds in May. In January, solds obviously reflect what happened in November, December. Less activity showed the lowest level of sold listings since then. However, there was one bright spot in the January numbers. Pendings were higher in January than in December, which means maybe you're starting to see a little bit more activity than you were seeing in December and January. So hopefully that doesn't happen. And normally, seasonally, January is usually lower than December for pending. So that's also a really good sign that January was up in pending. So it's not all doom and gloom, but I would say this, I think the first quarter into the, you know, as you see this, the closings are going to drop significantly year over year. And it could get really tight out there for closings in the first quarter. So you're going to see a significant drop year over year. And solds, and really we just couldn't keep pace. We don't have the inventory to keep pace with that furried frenzy we had from May 17th of 2020 through May 17th of 2021. We just depleted all that inventory. And then we look at it weekly too. I think this is a really good lick. I was happier because we saw 2 weeks in January where we had more new listings than we did the year before, but then we fall back again, you know, and so we go up, fall back, go up, fall down. We see those trend lines, right? So, but look at solds, right? January solds were really bad. We saw that because look at it compared to the previous year. That's why we saw that down. So, really there, obviously that's keeping prices higher and everything else. We are seeing more fall throughs. We're tracking that, pending fall throughs. Now they're never getting more than like 10 or 11 a week. But I mean, usually it's like 1 or 2 in the past year, so a year ago. So we definitely do see more fall throughs than we do, but you know, when you're getting 9 versus 1, you know, statistically that looks a lot, but that's 8 properties. But then 8 properties out of 292, so that's not, you know, completely there. So, you know, I think that does have some stuff. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to bring in our guests for the rest of the Zoomed in, the people you'd rather hear from than hear from me. So I'm going to turn it over to them, introduce and turn it over to them. I'm going to monitor the chat for comments, the Q&A. Please use the Q&A for comments if you want. I'm sure Erin and she can let me know their presentation. Definitely this recording will go out, Erin, if you want to get us your presentation, if you can, and we can send that out as well, because I'm sure people will always ask about that as well. But I want to bring in both Erin Perry, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the Cape Cod Commission, and Kristy Senatori, who is the Executive Director of the Cape Cod Commission for to talk about their two recent studies. And Serena has BOM on that chart I had, that's back on market. But that could be a pending fall through, but it also could be temporary off market, back on market, things like that. It's not just pending fall throughs, but it's for BOM, it was back on market. So Kristy and Erin, I don't know who's going to start, but I'm going to turn it over to you guys and let you guys go at it. If you want to share your screen, Erin, and get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan. And that was really interesting data and information that you just shared too. I think we'll be able to incorporate some of that into the discussion that we have this morning. And then certainly as we collect more data and information on the status of home ownership and availability on the market, that's going to be certainly something we're continuing to track. So we appreciate the invitation to be here today. We're going to be sharing some information and some data and some detail on our two new surveys, as Ryan mentioned. Recently, we conducted a new homeowner survey of those that purchased a home over the course of the pandemic, as well as our third iteration of our second homeowner survey. So I'm going to start with the new homeowner survey and give you a little bit of a sense of some of the findings there, and then Erin's going to share some of the details around the second homeowner survey, and then give you a little bit of a preview of how we're going to be using this data in moving into the future. So one of the places where we wanted to start was really looking at some of the changes of address that are filed with the Postal Service. And so the numbers that you're seeing here are 2019 and 2020 data at the top. And so for 2019 data, we actually found that there were more address changes requests out of Barnstable County. And so comparing this to what we saw in 2020, we saw there was a significant increase in the number of families and households that were moving to Barnstable County rather than out of it. Nearly 2,400 net new permanent address changes were filed for Cape Cod arrivals in 2020, compared to that net negative in 2019. Of those moves to Cape Cod addresses last year, over 3/4 of those were from Massachusetts, and nearly half were already located on the Cape. They could possibly be relocating for more space, taking advantage of some of the sales prices. And then the 5 states reflect the highest % share of arrivals to Cape Cod after Massachusetts in 2020. So you see Florida and New York certainly are high on that list. So this was one data set that we had to use. And then if we look at the number of sales and the number of properties that were on the inventory, as Ryan just mentioned, we've seen that significant decrease in inventory. So that top line that you're seeing is the median sales price for a single family home, where we saw in 2019 that was around 400,000. It takes us through to November of 2021, and I know that those numbers are continuing to evolve as well. But we also take a look at the inventory, and so we saw that there were a significant number of new purchases from January 2020 through 2021, and certainly we're still seeing that even today. So what we did following that was we started to hear anecdotally about some of the changes in our population, especially during the shoulder and off seasons. We saw more people with their lights on at home. We saw people pushing baby carriages down certain streets. And so we wanted to better understand some of the changes that we'd been seeing. So we worked collaboratively with the UMass Donahue Institute to conduct a new homeowner survey to those who purchased a home between April of 2020 and the middle of May 2021. So of the roughly 6,800 home purchases that were made on the Cape between April 2020 and May 2021, postcards were sent to a random sample, just over 5,800 direct recipients to an online survey. A mail-in survey was sent out later in the summer to try to capture some additional responses. And I want to thank Ryan and the Realtors Association for their assistance in helping to identify the sample for this survey. Certainly that information was extremely useful for us as we were to try to obtain some of these responses to the new homeowner survey. So some of the findings. So in total, we had about 403 homeowners complete the survey. So the response rate was just under 7%. Most were completed online, and then we had about 67 surveys that were completed through a mailed response. And what you'll see here is that 66% of those residents were occupying their home year round. 32% were occupying their new home purchase part-time. In terms of age of respondents, the highest category here was 36% of those that were age 65 and older. And 52%, more than half, had an annual household income of over $150,000. Many were well educated, having a graduate or professional degree and a bachelor's degree. So certainly well over half had both of these higher learning education degrees. And then if we look at some of the home ownership qualities, many had owned property on the Cape before. So this could be their immediate family or the actual homeowner itself, 52% there. And most of these, 79%, were single family homes. There were a portion that were condos. And what you'll see here is that purchase price, over 50% of the purchases were over $500,000. So you can see that 32% in that 500 to 750 category, 21% were over $750,000. And so we also found that given the rise in remote work during the pandemic, one of the areas we're most curious to learn about was the current and predicted employment status and some of the locations of the new homeowners. And nearly 70% of the respondents were employed, and nearly 70% of those that were employed worked for an employer that was based off Cape. 42% of the new homeowners were working fully remotely at the time of the purchase. They did expect that might lower to about a quarter over the course of the following 6 months, while hybrid work was expected to increase from about 30 to 43%. So certainly this is evolving, and the numbers may have even evolved further since the time of the survey, and the pandemic certainly not being over. But that did just give us a sense of how the new homeowners were using their properties in terms of their work status. And in terms of the top industries for the new homeowners, it was a little bit of a spread here, but not surprisingly, 18% professional and technical services, 14% healthcare, social assistance, 13% education, 11% finance and insurance. And then there was a smaller percentage, about 6%, which were in information and telecommunications. And so next we looked at the number of respondents that said the pandemic actually influenced their decision to buy a home on Cape, and that was about 35%. And so the ways in which the pandemic influenced their decision was something we wanted to drill a little bit deeper on. And so what we found was that over 50% said they didn't need to live by their job anymore. So not surprising given what we found about the remote work questions that we had asked. 44% identified proximity to outdoor recreation as one of the reasons that they decided to purchase their home on Cape Cod. 25% wanted more living space or a bigger home. Similarly, 24% wanted to live in a less dense area. So certainly we saw some of these coming from more urban areas, moving to the Cape where there's a little bit more space. 8% decided to retire early based on the pandemic. And so what we also wanted to find were some of the most important and least important factors overall for the new homeowners when they were deciding to purchase their home on the Cape. And this is regardless of whether the pandemic had influenced their decision or not. The most important factors when deciding to purchase a home were access to the coast. 85% indicated that this was extremely or very important to them. Looking at outdoor recreational opportunities, 76% indicated again that this was extremely or very important. Environmental quality, almost 70% indicated that that was extremely or very important to them. And then again, not surprising, but a good place to retire. So 69% indicating that that was extremely or very important to them. And then none of these certainly super surprising, but the least important factors were school quality. So given the age of many of the home purchasers during this time period, may not necessarily have children in the school systems here in the region, 66% indicated that this wasn't at all important. Similarly, a good place to raise their children wasn't necessarily that important to some of the new homeowners. And job or economic opportunities. So it seems as though those that were employed were already employed in a stable job environment. So nearly 60% indicated that this wasn't necessarily important for them as they looked at their new home location. And so we also wanted to take a look at some of the facilities that were most and least used in terms of the Cape, and looking at us in terms of infrastructure, as well as some of our public facilities. And so not surprising, but helpful here, 85% use the town beaches at least once a month or more. 60% use the town conservation lands, 45% use libraries once a month or more. So really giving us an idea of how our new residents are using some of the services, where we might want to look to plan for additional infrastructure, where we might want to advocate for additional resources being brought into the region as well. Least public facilities that have been used, public transportation. Somewhat surprising, 80% never used senior centers or services. Boat landings didn't seem to be one that was highly used, or public golf courses. So this is all interesting information and data that we'll use as we look to future planning and future regional efforts as well. So what we also found was that these are amongst respondents that reported using some of these services. So 77% of the new homeowners reported using some of our emergency services, acute care services on the Cape. 52% were using on-Cape primary care providers, and 42% using specialists. And then certainly, given that they were coming from another location, many of them still used off-Cape professional services, but many were starting to evolve and use some on-Cape. So 60% used on-Cape legal services, 57% were banking, over half were using insurance services, accounting, and investment. But less than 10% of respondents actually reported using childcare services. And so a couple more slides. One of the questions we wanted to also ask as we look at the potential need to expand our broadband networks in the region is internet availability and accessibility, whether this is an issue for some of those that are just coming to the region, if they're coming from places that may have much more robust systems. But 73% actually reported that their internet allows them in their household to perform all the necessary tasks with very few problems. 21% said their internet causes some problems for them. Only 5% said that their internet service is inadequate for performing some of those necessary tasks. So certainly this is interesting as we look to future planning for broadband initiatives. 95% access the internet through a fixed connection. And what we found was most of those households had 1 to 2 people using internet at the same time. And then fewer had 5 to 6 people, only 2% that were using the internet at the same time. And so lastly, we wanted to ask the question about how our new homeowners would be anticipating using their home into the future. So these percents are really capture the information about how they anticipate using their home ever and at some point in time over the next 20 years. And so this is helpful not only for planning for today, but planning into the future. It's also helpful for us as we look at some of our second homeowner data. How do these statistics start to compare over time? And so what we're finding is that 90% of those respondents are using their home as their primary residence or anticipate doing that. 32% want to use it as a second home for family into the future. 32% may sell it. Short-term rental was also a little bit higher than we anticipated. I think nearly 20% anticipated using it as a short-term rental. Again, not necessarily surprising given where we are with the short-term rental market here on the Cape. And only 4% plan to use it as a year-round rental. So these are certainly just some of the high-level data points from that new homeowner survey that we issued last year. All this information can be found in a lot of more detail that we'll be sharing on our website as well. So I'm going to hand it to Erin now to talk through some of the results of our second homeowner survey.
Great, thank you, Kristy, and thank you, Ryan. As both Kristy and Ryan mentioned, the new homeowner survey was a kind of new effort for us, but the second homeowner survey is something that we have done a couple of times in the past. And so, as Kristy already described, during the pandemic, we really started to kind of see some of those changes in population, and so felt that it was really important to kind of initiate a second homeowner survey at this time. And so we did mail the postcard that you see here to a population of about 20,000, and so that was a list or a sample, a random sample of the nearly 63,000 second Cape homes we have in the region. And so this was just a single mailing design, and we received 924 responses to that survey. The second homeowner's tenure was, prior to the pandemic. So 97% of those respondents owned a second home prior to April 1st of 2020. And in general, these second homeowners are an older demographic. Over 90% are over the age of 55. They have a relatively high household income and had attained a relatively high level of education. And just maybe a note here, compared to the prior homeowner surveys back in 2008 and 2017, the respondents to this survey had a 10 to 12% increase in terms of the education and income levels achieved here. So just a slightly different demographic perhaps than the past surveys. Just over a quarter of the respondents said that this second home was not the first property that they or their families had owned on the Cape. Most of the second homeowners own single family homes. There's 10% of the respondents own a condominium. There was a very small number of respondents that owned another type of property, like a two-family home or a cottage in a cottage colony. Most had purchased rather than inherited the home or the land where their home is located. And almost 70% are located within 1 mile of the coastline, almost 50% within 1 mile of a freshwater pond. When asked about how the pandemic influenced the use of their second home, 44% of respondents said that they spend more time in their Cape Cod home than in previous years due to the pandemic. And so there were a variety of factors that played a role in this increased use of their second home, including lower rates of COVID-19 on the Cape, more living space or a bigger home in this area. Again, the proximity to outdoor recreation, which has been certainly a consistent theme in our surveys, both this year and in the past. Again, they may be closer to family or friends and generally just looking to live in a less dense area than where their primary residence is located. Overall, they indicated that there was approximately a 30% increase in average annual use days, either by themselves or by their family and friends. And so you can see here in this kind of spread of the months that a lot of those kind of more significant increases are really seen in the spring and fall shoulder seasons, as Kristy had also indicated. And in terms of employment status, the respondents were fairly split between employed respondents and retired respondents. 78% of those that responded are working for an off-Cape based employer, very few for an on-Cape based employer, with some that are also self-employed. And 33% at the time of the survey were working entirely remotely, but many were anticipating returning to at least a hybrid work environment, within the next 6 months or so. The top industries of the employed second homeowners are fairly similar to what the new homeowners identified, several in the professional and technical services, education services, healthcare and social assistance, finance and insurance, and then real estate, rental and leasing. So those were the top industries in terms of those that were employed. And for those, those factors that were important or maybe less important in terms of the kind of their purchase of their second home, consistent with the new homeowner survey and with past second homeowner surveys, access to the coast, outdoor recreational opportunities, and environmental quality really top the list. They're extremely or very important in terms of the factors that they weighed in their purchase. The least important factors, again, similar to the new homeowner survey, were school quality, the job or economic opportunities, and the fact that the region is a good place to raise children. Those were indicated not at all important by 75% or more of the respondents. And so, perhaps not surprising given the demographic of second homeowners, who these kind of elements may not be as important to those particular individuals. In terms of the use of public facilities, again, most use town beaches once a month or more. Transfer stations, more than half use once a month or more. And again, over half use conservation lands once a month or more. Very few identify that they use public transportation, senior centers or services, town boat landings, or other town recreation programs. So less use in those areas, and it's similar to kind of what Kristy identified for the new homeowner survey. These are factors that we can utilize in future kind of local and regional planning. So useful information to know from our second homeowners. When asked about how they anticipate using their home, at some point in the next 20 years, 31% identified that they'll continue to use this as a primary, or they'll anticipate using this as a primary residence. Very few identified that they would use it as a short-term rental. Over half anticipate handing it down to family at some point during that time. Nearly 80% anticipate using it as a second home for family. 4% may rent it year round, and a little over a quarter anticipate selling it. One thing that was interesting in terms of how the responses relate to past second homeowner surveys is that 19% indicated in this survey that they'd convert their home to their primary home in the next 5 years. And so in that short time frame that we're looking at, that's far more than identified that they'd be converting it to their primary home when we surveyed second homeowners back in 2008 and 2017. So perhaps people are thinking about moving here permanently in the near future. Around 3/4 of respondents use on-Cape construction, trade and repair, as well as landscaper and yard services located on Cape. And far fewer are using on-Cape providers for professional services like insurance, banking, and legal services. About half are using on-Cape hospital or emergency room and acute care centers. And when asked about the internet service, a little over 70% reported that their internet is adequate for them to do what they need to, with a few indicating that their internet service is inadequate for performing necessary tasks. About 4% find it inadequate. One thing I'll just note is that, like the new homeowner survey, this was an online survey. So while this is useful information for us to obtain as part of these efforts, I think we also have to note that those who may have inadequate service may be less likely to respond. So it's one factor we can consider in thinking about access to the internet moving forward. 90% of the individuals who responded note that they access the internet through a fixed connection, and 65% have only 1 to 2 people utilizing the internet at the same time. And so, as Kristy mentioned, all of this survey data is accessible, and the full reports are accessible through our website, and all of it will soon be accessible on the Data Cape Cod website. And so some of you may be familiar with the Data Cape Cod site that was launched early in the pandemic, really focused on providing local and regional data sets that support planning and recovery efforts. So very much geared toward the COVID-19 pandemic response and recovery. We have been working to expand that site to include far more data sets that are useful for a broader range of planning and economic development work. And we're near able to release that. It is very near final. And as you can see here, it will still support those kind of data sets that are more specific to pandemic recovery and resiliency. All of the data and information will be available in data dashboards or mapping applications, and combined with the information obtained through the surveys here, and certainly future surveys that may be completed. This information in Data Cape Cod will really be critical for forecasting our future needs, supporting local and regional planning efforts, and kind of our continued economic recovery and economic resiliency into the future. And so I think with that, that's what we have. And Ryan, I think we'd be happy to answer questions or however you'd like us to move forward.
Yeah, I think someone asked, where can they access the Data Cape Cod site? What is that address?
Sure. The Data Cape Cod site is datacapecod.com, but this version that I just kind of gave you a quick preview of is not live yet, but will be shortly.
All right, so, I guess to you, Erin and Kristy, what are your big takeaways from this? Like, to you, what surprised you guys, or, what did it confirm that the region needs to think about going forward based on this data?
Sure, that's a great question, Ryan. And I think was when we got the results back from the surveys, we were trying to figure out what were the big things that we weren't expecting. And I think one of the biggest components of the survey responses were that number that suggested the pandemic influenced their decision to purchase a home. So over 35% of the new homeowners indicated that the pandemic really did have an influence on whether they purchased their home on the Cape. And so that certainly was something that is interesting in terms of looking at planning. I think we'll need to take a look at how this evolves and how those new homeowners, what they're planning to do with their property into the future. So this gives us a snapshot in time. I think over the next few years, it'll certainly be interesting to see if these new homeowners actually stay here or if they potentially retreat back to the places where they had originated if they were living here full time. I think one of the main pieces of information too that we're getting out of this is really how to plan for infrastructure needs. And there are a lot of different sources of funding out there at the moment. And if we can use some of this data and information to advocate for additional resources for our region, whether it's for housing, whether it's for infrastructure, whether it's for water quality, that's where we're really trying to take some of this new data and information that we found and put it to good use and really make sure that we can bring in the most efficient planning and the most efficient programming for the region.
One of the things that struck out to me on there was the amount of people that have moved here that are still working, that are going to work off Cape, and whether it's in a remote format or a hybrid format or even commuting format. And I think that really has to shape employers' mindsets going forward. I wonder how much that might drive wage growth on the Cape from Cape employers if now they're competing with off-Cape wages. And so to me, that was kind of one of the big takeaways that employers and job providers need to be thinking about.
Yeah, it's another great point. And I think still it's difficult to have a full understanding of those impacts. I think even a year from now, 2 years from now, we'll have a better understanding, but it does give us a sense of how those that are new to the Cape are, how they're employed and where we may want to change some of our planning and our employers' planning.
Yeah, and I think the data kind of shows that a lot of people that bought were going to be year-round Cape Codders. They're wealthier, they're whiter, and they have more education than, quite honestly, the population we had here before. I mean, that's pretty much sums up who bought during COVID, it seems like. I guess the other thing to me, that the biggest non-talked about story in the region was the growth we had in the census, even kind of pre-COVID into COVID. And I think that kind of gets lost. And so I'm really going to be interested. I think the census was a good indication that we were seeing growth even prior to COVID, right?
Yeah, the census numbers and certainly looking at our population uptick was pre-COVID. And so some of that, maybe has been exacerbated by COVID, but that increase in population has been over the course of the past 10 years. I think too, what we're seeing with the census is the increase in diversity, which maybe isn't necessarily showing on the new homeowner survey. So that's certainly something that's interesting coming out of the census. Certainly not when you're looking at it compared to the state, but
it rose from like 7% of non-white to like 14%, where they double that.
Exactly.
In the census, right?
Right.
Okay. And what do Donahue Institute and you guys think about the 7% response? Is that good, bad? Was that what y'all were looking for?
It's funny, we asked the Donahue Institute the same question, and I think that they were comfortable with the response rate, and they thought it was a reasonable response rate. I think it really, we sent it to a fairly broad sample, given that there were roughly 6,800 new homeowners, and I without the numbers right in front of me, but sent it out to roughly 5,800. So, certainly it's hard to say what motivated some to respond over others. And, there may be some, certain characteristics that we missed in terms of new homeowners that may not have been able to respond or decided not to respond. But the Donahue Institute seemed comfortable with the response rate.
All right. And then I guess we had one question about how Commission does a lot of house data tracking. Are you tracking house data around race and ethnicity and things of that nature? I know you guys have been working on a lot of some equity things. I don't know how much, I guess the question is how much are you diving into and what are you working on that end?
We're certainly looking at the new census data and some of the changes in the diversity of the Cape. I think we anticipate some more census data coming out that will give us a little bit more detail there and a little bit more of a breakdown. We do have that breakdown town by town. In terms of what else we're doing with diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think what a lot of our climate work has actually taken a focus on equity. And so in the next several months, we'll be working with a climate equity working group to really kind of establish some best practices and opportunities for including more of the population in some of the solutions to climate change and making sure that those more vulnerable populations aren't as significantly or severely impacted. So there are a variety of different ways we're starting to look at that. But I think the census data too will certainly start to help us kind of dive a little bit deeper into where some of the greater impacts might be.
You highlighted the top things people listed as far as what they moved here for. There's a question about were the arts on the list to be selected, and I'm assuming they just didn't reach the top portion.
That was less of a focus for this particular survey, but we have put more of an emphasis on kind of the role of the second homeowners in some of the local economy, particularly the arts and entertainment, in prior second homeowner surveys. So I believe, I'm trying to pull up the questions quickly, that there was some reference to some of those elements, but it wasn't the focus of the 2021 survey. But we do have some data related more specifically to the arts.
That was on there that just didn't raise up like outdoor recreation and environment and other things like that.
I believe there were some elements that relate to the arts, but I could get back to you with the details.
Okay. All right. Anything else that we're not hitting on with questions to kind of put forward about the output of this survey and that kind of thing?
The one thing that Erin did mention, though, is that we did try to get a sense of our new and second homeowner surveys, what their interests were in kind of water quality too, and looking at some of the more environmental issues that has been a focus of ours in the past, looking at wastewater. So certainly as we look at water quality in terms of our freshwater, knowing that we're looking at a freshwater initiative in the course of the next several months, it was important for us to ask about access to the coast and how important those issues are. So there were certainly some areas where we were able to kind of go a little bit in off in a bunch of different directions to get some more of that detailed information. But those were, not necessarily the focus of the surveys, but getting this new information is just the first set of data that we'll be continuing to collect as we look to really kind of hone in on what our housing market is, what the state of the economy is in terms of the housing needs and future planning.
Now, I know you were you tracked a lot of data throughout COVID too with other things as well. Is there anything that kind of wasn't covered under this that you have found interesting in your other data collection? I know you all looked a lot at like water usage and a bunch of other things, that other data points out there. Have you been able to kind of bring anything else in that might not have been covered under this survey that you've seen in other parts of the data?
Sure, and I'm sure Erin can chime in here too, but one area where we were tracking was bridge crossings. So trying to get a sense of how many visitors we were having to the region, who was staying, how long they might be staying for. And certainly we saw a decrease in bridge traffic over the course of the pandemic. But then we saw, when we moved into the phases of reopening, we saw a significant increase. And in fact, those numbers are far exceeding our numbers from 2017, 2018, and 2019. So we're absolutely seeing more people here. It's just getting a better sense of how long they plan to stay and what they're planning to do when they're here. So there's a lot more detail there we can dive into. Some of those traffic data sets are actually on Data Cape Cod as it exists now. Those will evolve into the new site as well, but you can certainly take a look at some of that. We also tracked some of the rail trail data. As we know, people were using the outdoor recreation opportunities and doing more bike-friendly, pedestrian-friendly activities. And we saw a significant increase in some of the pedestrian traffic along some of our outdoor recreational areas.
Awesome, awesome. And I think there's a question coming about drinking water quality. I think is that where you're getting to the freshwater initiative that you're taking on, or is that separate?
Sure, that definitely plays into the freshwater initiative. I mean, the freshwater initiative is focused on our freshwater ponds and the health and potential strategies for addressing remediation, restoration in those ponds. But those ponds are directly linked to our groundwater and our sole source aquifer, and it's really all something that has to be looked at, as a whole. So that's certainly part of that initiative.
I don't see any more questions coming in, so I just want to thank you guys for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. If you got, Erin, if you make those slides available to me, and we'll get those out, but also this recording will get out as well. So thank you guys very much for taking the time. We really appreciate all the work the commission does and the partnership the Association of Realtors and the commission has on a bunch of issues. So we really appreciate what you guys are doing for the community.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.